It's a hashtag #MeToo moment, which should be rocking the highest echelons of public health and tobacco control, but instead, silence. The allegations are troubling: sexual harassment, racial discrimination, and academic misconduct leveled against 71-year-old Dr. Stanton Glantz, the most well-known tobacco control researcher in the world. The hashtag #MeToo movement continues to rage as new allegations of sexual misconduct surface daily. Prominent men have been publicly denounced and fired from their jobs, yet Dr. Stanton Glantz remains at his. Glantz is employed by the University of California, San Francisco, where he's a professor and director of the Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education. Glantz first rose to prominence with his controversial research on the effects of secondhand smoke on the heart, and gained notoriety for his role in the battle against big tobacco in the 1990s. Today, he is principal investigator overseeing a team of academic researchers on a $20 million FDA-funded program developing science-based approaches to tobacco regulation. In recent years, Glantz has emerged as a fanatical opponent of e-cigarettes. A barrage of research papers and UCSF press releases reveal his trademark smugness as he attacks every finding that supports vaping as a safer alternative to smoking, and dismisses any evidence that vaping is an effective tool for smoking cessation. Glantz proselytizes the gateway theory that states youth vaping leads to youth smoking. He admonishes dual use, demonstrating ingenuous understanding of the smoker's journey to quit, and he derides research colleagues and organizations such as Public Health England for promoting vaping as a tool for harm reduction. What's your bottom line on e-cigarettes?
If you ask me the question, do I think the world would be a better place if we didn't have any e-cigarettes? Yes, I do. I think e-cigarettes are making the cigarette epidemic worse. But you know the one great thing about what's going on in England? And I mean, I think those people are, again, they're friends of mine. I've worked with some of them for years. I think they're absolutely nuts right now.
The allegations against Professor Glantz were made public 2 months ago in a lawsuit filed by Dr. Eunice Neeley, an academic researcher hired by UC San Francisco in 2015 to work directly under Professor Glantz at the Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education. In the lawsuit, Neeley alleges Glantz abused his authority and prestige and sexually harassed her and other female subordinates, subjecting them to misogynistic and racially insensitive behavior. Neeley, who is black, says Glantz repeatedly stared at her body and chest, leered at her, forced her to hug him on several occasions, and made sexually charged remarks. In one instance of inappropriate sex-related comments in the workplace, Neeley says Professor Glantz used people responding to a survey by Playboy magazine to discuss research bias, and in another, he used sexual intercourse demonstrated visually using his hands as a metaphor for a scientific phenomenon. Last March, Neeley informed her direct supervisor about Glantz's sexual harassment and requested a new mentor, but claims the harassment continued after Glantz formally stepped down as her advisor. After UCSF notified Glantz of its investigation against him, Neeley alleges Glantz insisted on being named co-author of her work and ultimately removed her name from a research paper that he took credit for. The UCSF Board of Regents is also named as a defendant for failing to protect Neeley and other women from the ongoing harassment, which Neeley claims forced her out of her job in June. June of last year was a busy time for Dr. Glantz. While fending off sexual harassment charges in the workplace, he was appearing before the San Francisco Board of Supervisors to deliver testimony which closed the deal on the ban for e-liquid flavors.
I've been getting a lot of email, and personally I think this is a myth, but you're probably the leading tobacco researcher in the world. That's been put forward is that this will disproportionately hurt e-cigarettes, and e-cigarettes are a harm reduction strategy that helps people get off of tobacco. Now, I think, from my perspective, I think it does the opposite thing, but I don't have the data or the expertise to affirmatively say that.
Well, that's an area where there's a lot of research accumulating. We published a paper about 1.5 years ago that showed that smokers who use e-cigarettes are 30% less likely to quit smoking than smokers who don't use e-cigarettes. And so while it's true that some people have successfully quit with e-cigarettes, for most people they actually make it harder to quit. Moreover, while e-cigarettes deliver fewer cancer-causing chemicals than conventional cigarettes do, they deliver as much ultrafine particles and certain other toxins, and those ultrafine particles trigger inflammatory processes that lead to heart attacks, that lead to strokes, that lead to non-cancer lung disease.
Joining us today to discuss the allegations against Dr. Glantz is Dr. Carl Phillips, a leading advocate for harm reduction. Dr. Phillips is an epidemiologist with a PhD in economics and public policy. He's been investigating and writing about tobacco harm reduction for over 20 years. You can find his explosive work at thedailyvapor.com, which is fast becoming the go-to site for vaping news and analysis. Dr. Phillips, thanks for coming on RegWatch. First off, you have a background in public health. Does that mean you have experience as well in tobacco control?
Well, no, I was definitely never part of tobacco control. I mean, basically, from day one that I was focused on this, I was actually an enemy of tobacco control because tobacco control has always been anti-harm reduction. So though I'm an insider in public health, my postdoc, my professorships were all in public health. I definitely have not been on the tobacco control side of things.
Well, it does seem like some in tobacco control relish making enemies. Dr. Phillips, were you surprised to learn a sexual harassment lawsuit had been filed against Dr. Glantz?
It was not surprising to hear this break about someone in tobacco control. We've had these Metoo type stories break about powerful men in all sorts of areas, and it just seemed like a matter of time until we were going to hear about something from tobacco control, because it does produce the kind of people who unfortunately might do something like this.
Dr. Phillips, what exactly do you mean by that?
The men, and it's almost all men, who rise to the top of an operation like this are going to be bullies. I mean, you think about it, their job is to bully people, to bully vapors into not vaping, smokers into not smoking, and so forth. They have to be someone who's comfortable spending their life doing that. Furthermore, what they do is produce propaganda, blatant, lying propaganda under the guise of science. And so they're going to be people who are comfortable with not telling the truth, with getting away with it over and over again, because there's no check on this behavior of theirs. So, you get a person who's willing to bully, who has had money thrown at him for years, who has gotten away with ridiculous deceptions. I mean, just incredibly obvious lying over and over and over again. And yeah, you have a recipe for any sort of abuse.
Dr. Phillips, based on your reporting for Daily Vapor, walk us through the allegations against Dr. Glantz.
The allegations against Dr. Glantz, and these were made public in a court filing in a California court, were for various bits of boorish behavior that is reasonably described as sexual harassment, leering, rude comments, bringing up sexual topics inappropriately with in conversations with female proteges and so forth. There were some racial overtones supposedly in this. They're a little more subtle, but it was part of the allegation. And then there's the much more bright line allegation that, instead of walking away from this, apologizing, letting this young woman move to another advisor and leave her alone, even if none of it was true, that would have been the sensible thing to do. But instead, Glantz demanded that he keep control over a lot of her work, insisted on control over a paper that she had already written under his tutelage, and eventually went so far as to steal that paper, to take it and without her permission, without her knowledge, according to the allegation, send it to a journal for publication under his name without her name even being on it. And that is just bright line academic fraud.
Dr. Phillips, Professor Glantz has responded to the allegations in 2 posts on his university blog. In the first one, on December 7th, he denies every claim reported to be included in the lawsuit, while acknowledging there are other women preparing to come forward with additional complaints. Then in a post on January 8th, Glantz confronted the issue regarding the authorship of the paper by posting a quote from a letter the University Research Integrity Officer sent to the American Association for Cancer Research back in June, which states, "The reason Dr. Glantz did not include Dr. Neeley as an author when he initially submitted the manuscript was despite repeated requests, Dr. Neeley had refused to grant Dr. Glantz permission to include her as an author on the paper." It goes on to state that as principal investigator, Dr. Glantz has the authority, responsibility, and final approval over the project. Basically, he's lord of the manor. Dr. Phillips, what's your response to this explanation for why Dr. Neeley was not listed as an author?
In response to it, as you know, somebody who spent a lot of his life in academia, I mean, my first inclination is to just call bullshit on it from the start, because, you know, you can't take something that somebody else wrote. And, you know, this was her paper.
Dr. Phillips, I think this letter hurts Glantz and the university more than it helps. It shows an institution protecting a powerful man who brings in millions of dollars of tobacco control research funding at the expense of a young female academic worker. Dr. Phillips, this certainly doesn't sound like a Me Too moment where the woman is heard, believed, and supported. What's been the response to all this?
Literal silence. Not a word of condemnation, not a word of defense either. Okay, so this is a very rare case for, you know, late 2017, now early 2018.
You know, I find the silence quite incredible considering that this is San Francisco, the epicenter of PC culture, and that tobacco control is quintessential progressive.
Tobacco control is, and I don't mean this as hyperbole, tobacco control is cult-like. And when the cult leader is accused, and he's definitely a leader of this cult, is accused of something, you circle the wagons. You don't say anything about it. You don't so much as acknowledge it with a defense. Tobacco control knows that they're not answerable to anyone. They're their own self-perpetuating empire. They don't have to care about this, and so they don't.
That, Dr. Phillips, is a bit scary. Okay, final question. Let's postulate if the Me Too movement were to take down Dr. Glantz, what would be the impact on vaping?
It probably would make some difference. You know, you think in many of these situations that no one person matters very much. It's a giant machine that's arrayed there, and you know, that's true to some extent. But there are few people out there, and none with quite his prominence, who are willing to just blatantly lie about particulate matter and the gateway effect and just produce utterly absurd junk science to the extent that he is. And so, yeah, it would make a difference. It would take a little bit of the pressure off the throttle for producing the worst of the propaganda that vaping has to deal with out there.
Well, that's it for this edition of RegWatch. Before you head off, please like us on Facebook and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.